Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Big news for Indiana over the weekend, securing a commitment from five-star forward Liam McNeeley out of Montverde Academy. To help us break down that commitment and also discuss a couple of other recruitments that are on the mind of all Indiana fans, Rob Cassidy, the head of basketball at Rivals.com, joins us on Podcast on the Brink. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Hey, thank you for having me on. Glad to be here. How are you?
Doing very well. Indiana fans obviously excited about the news over the weekend with Liam McNeeley. Wanted to get your thoughts on just his game and how it translates to the college level. What do you think are the skills that most easily translate to this level, and how do you see him fitting in immediately from day one at the college level?
The thing that I always say about Liam is, if you're making a list of the top everything in a class, he's not going to be the top shooter in the class. He's not going to be the top defender in a class, but he might be in the top 10 in all of it. He's, in a modern day game where, versatility is everything. That's what he has in spades. He's one of these guys that I've seen play, 30 times probably in his career. And, even with top flight guys, sometimes you go when they have really bad off nights where the shot isn't going and they kind of get frustrated. You never really see that with him. He's been remarkably consistent, remarkably versatile, and has become a much better defender in the last year. I think that's kind of where he's grown the most, is on that side of the ball. So there aren't a lot of holes there, even if, he's not going to blow you away in one area. But, I think that's good for the modern game, especially where, especially the NBA, they value that versatility over all else. And Liam has that in spades.
In terms of just his offensive game, what you talked about the versatility, but what kind of system maybe is he going to be best in terms of getting the ball in his spots, being ready to score? Can he handle the ball well?
Yeah.
And kind of what, like positionally, where does he fit best?
I like him as a three. He handles the ball pretty well. He shoots it pretty well. He shoots it really well, actually. He's probably in the top 20 shooters in this class. And he can stretch the floor, too, with his height. He's a threat out there on the perimeter, so you have to respect it. He handles it well enough to where he can also take you off the dribble if you're a little bit bigger and you're guarding him too closely. I've seen him do a little bit of everything. He shines in transition. I guess if there's a knock on his game, it's sometimes he'll throw the ball into the stands. He trusts himself a little bit too much when it comes to, making passes, but he is, he's a creative passer. And, you'll kind of like to see, you'd rather see that than somebody that's scared passing the basketball and it's going to make passive turnovers. His turnovers are almost always aggressive. So yeah, I think, like I said, the versatility is everything, and he's become a better shooter. Everybody's had to respect that. I think that's happened since he's gotten to Montverde. I think being down there among all those other top flight prospects has really kind of helped him grow his game, going against those guys in practice and playing the national schedule that school plays.
Yeah, you kind of just led into my next question in terms of being at Montverde. Indiana fans are accustomed to high school basketball being played within the state, guys growing up and playing at their own high schools and coming through the ranks. And now with prep schools, I can remember back when I was a kid, a lot of kids were already going to Oak Hill, but now it's LaLue and Montverde and these other schools popping up. But how do you think it impacts not just McNeely, but some of these other guys as well, going to these prep schools and playing a more national schedule against better competition? Does it really make them more ready for college when they get there? And how does it impact their games?
I think it depends who you are, like anything else. Like, there are guys that have gone to these places. You've got to be a certain type. Let's put it that way. You can go there and it can be real quick to bury you. You can get frustrated. You can end up not playing big minutes as a junior or sophomore and get frustrated and transfer out. And it can work against you. In Liam's case, it is not. It's kind of sharpened him, I think. He played big minutes last year as a junior. It's kind of sharpened his game, I think, because he has that kind of buy-in. He has that kind of mentality. I think he wants to play against the best. I've seen it go the other way very quickly on guys at Montverde and at IMG and at places like Oak Hill, like you mentioned. So it really just depends. I don't think that there's, it's not a one size fit all. It's not for everybody. It has been for Liam, I think. And I think it's had a positive impact on his game.
What do you think usually is the prime, just to kind of touch a little bit more on the prep school thing, just what do you think is the main motivation for a lot of these players to do this? Is it the competition? Is it playing a national schedule? Is it being able to focus more on their development with the facilities at these places, a combination of these things? But what, in general, why do you think it's been such a thing that's become more prominent, I guess, in the last decade or so?
I think some guys like the competition. I think some guys like the notoriety, to be quite honest with you. If you're at one of the schools, you're playing on ESPN, You're getting the exposure. I think some guys like the exposure. Some guys that maybe if they're on a high school team where they don't kind of like the way things are going or anything else, they can take off and go to an IMG or a Montverde or an Oak Hill. There are a ton of different reasons. And I think the right reason really is for the competition. I think if that's why you're doing it, it has more of a tendency to work out for you. Now, if you're running for something or if you're doing it to chase clout or whatever, which we've seen from guys, sometimes it ends in disaster. It will be blow-ups. They will end up at their third high school or fourth high school in 4 years. And, it can really stunt their development. And so if you're going there for the right reasons, I think it's a great tool. If you're not, sometimes it can work against you.
Montverde's had some really great teams since they've kind of burst onto the scene. Where do you think this year's team with Flag and Queen and Asa Newell and Rob Wright and Curtis Givens, kind of the list goes on. You can just go down their roster. It almost feels like it could be a Final Four team. And once these guys get to college, if they were all on the same team, where does this stack up just in terms of the teams that they've had over the years?
I don't know who's going to beat them. I think it's the best one I've seen there at Montverde. I was talking to a coach that has to play them this year, who has a bunch of Division I players. I mean, this isn't a coach in the middle of nowhere. This is a coach with a bunch of Division I players. And he told me, we're going to have to make 18 threes to have a chance in this game. I watched them at a preseason scrimmage in Orlando about 2 weeks ago. They were playing like a regular high school. It's almost like watching, I covered Blake Griffin when he was a senior in high school in Oklahoma, a 3A high school, playing against like frat guys. And it kind of reminded me of that on a larger scale. Like a regular high school has no business on the court with that Montverde team. There's maybe as many as 4 McDonald's All-Americans on that team. It ranked on paper, and they're going to have to play the season. I'm sure somebody will beat them maybe once. On paper, it's got to be among one of the best high school basketball teams in recent history.
So Indiana fans were obviously a couple weeks ago wondering when the first commitment was going to come, because we're kind of now less than a month from signing day without a commitment. As a fan base, you start to wonder, how's this going to work out? So they get Liam McNeeley, and now the attention shifts immediately to Boogie Fland, who on Monday says he's going to announce his decision on Friday. And then obviously Derek Queen, who Liam McNeeley made reference to when he made his announcement. It's his teammate at Montverde. He's obviously got a visit coming up this weekend to Maryland. He's got a decision to make, I would assume, at some time before signing day if he opts to sign early. First, I want to talk a little bit about Boogie Fland, just in terms of what he is as a player. Obviously, I've not seen him in person, but I've seen him a lot on film. You look at his national ranking, I think you guys have him as high as anybody. I think 10th in the country. He's as low as 33, depending on where you look. Why is he, in your eyes, a top 10 player in the class, and what are maybe some of the strengths and weaknesses of his game as it stands today?
We project through the draft. I understand why they dropped him over there. I get it. He had an up and down July. To say the least, I think. But our sample size on Boogie is so large that I didn't, I dropped him a couple spots too. We had him at 8. Is that I didn't want to punish him so bad for what amounts to like 4 bad games. When you have that kind of length and you have that kind of basketball IQ and you have the ability to facilitate and to create your own shot, I think that the consistency with shooting will come. The consistency with not turning the ball over will come. That's kind of development stuff where, the NBA looks at that and thinks, okay, we can teach this. And I think another year of growth will help him as far as like the distributing goes, which is kind of the knock on his game right now. But he carried an AAU team, to really be point blank about it, that didn't have, it was a Nike team. So they had D1 players, but some of these other teams they're playing have multiple top 50 players on the team. And, they didn't have that. So it was kind of the Boogie show at PSA this year. I think that projecting him forward is kind of why we like him, is because point guards that see the floor the way that Boogie sees the floor and are able to take guys off the dribble and move the way he moves they don't come around every day. So, this is kind of the way we looked at Cooper Flag last year. Like, he wasn't a perfect prospect. But you could see it, and you can kind of see the seeds with Boogie to where the NBA is going to love him. He's got that size, he's got that agility, he's got that basketball IQ. And I think he's just a really well-rounded point guard.
When you say he had some down games this summer, he just wasn't himself. Was he hurt? Was it just? It's interesting to me that after you've got kind of a body of work on a guy for this long, that his ranking, I'd read that too, that a couple places maybe had dropped him based on just how he played in July. And I get kind of, you have to use that as a piece in the evaluation tool, but
Sure.
I'm curious what you saw in those games, maybe that led him to maybe fall in the eyes of some.
Yeah, like I said, we dropped him 2 spots, so I don't know why they drastically free fell on the way they did. I can't answer for that. I like those guys over there. I respect the hell out of
Right.
them. So maybe they saw something I didn't. But he did, he had moments where he would get frustrated, and I think that maybe that worked against him to where when things are going well for Boogie, he can take over a game. There are times when things aren't going well that he can get pretty frustrated, and you can kind of see the mistakes compound, if that makes sense. And maybe they didn't like that, but I don't want to speak for, those other guys.
Right.
Because they do. They have a process of their own, and I respect their process.
In terms of his age, I've also read that he's young for his class. How much does that play into projecting him, not just for college, but beyond? I mean, obviously, if he comes in and college has a really good year, the NBA is going to look at, wow, this guy's only 18. This is maybe another year or two we can get out of him that we wouldn't be able to get out of somebody else.
Yeah, and it goes back to exactly what I was saying about why I didn't free fall. And like some of those mistakes he made in July are just young guy mistakes. It's gonna happen. Me at that age, at whatever sport, I played soccer, I played a little basketball, obviously not at this level, but you can get in your head. So yeah, I think the age definitely plays in his favor when you compare him to a guy like an Elliot Kadu, who was in that class originally, but is old for his age. I think there's definitely something to be looked at there as far as like on-court maturity and as far as decision-making more than anything else,
When you look at his recruitment, obviously it's down to Alabama, Indiana, Kentucky. Some are saying Alabama's not really in the mix, even though they've been listed as kind of a school. It's an Indiana, Kentucky battle. In terms of fit at both programs, how does he fit at Indiana and how does he fit at Kentucky potentially?
I'm not an expert on Kentucky or Indiana basketball or what they need. I think that at Indiana, that you definitely have more leeway to make some mistakes just because maybe the fan base isn't in winter national championship mode right now today. And if you don't bench him, kind of situation, I think he'd have some more leeway to play through the kind of the youthful mistakes if he makes them there at Indiana. I think at Kentucky, it's a brighter spotlight right now. It's all eyes are on John Calipari. There's so much talk about whether he has what it takes to coach in this era after a couple slow years. If things go downhill there this year, I mean, it could get pretty messy fast. That fan base expects a certain thing this year. So I think that's kind of, if you're okay with those kind of bright lights, I think that Kentucky is probably the play. If you want some leeway, I think that maybe Indiana's the play. I don't think
in terms of
if he goes to Alabama, I'll come on this podcast and eat the hat that I'm wearing right now.
So what's the reason to have when you put out a list or whatever to have Alabama on? Is it just because he visited there recently and they've been up to visit him? So it's kind of a courtesy thing to have them on the list, but it seems like you said, it seems like they're out.
Yeah, I think they were very, very alive for a time. And they kept coming in and, they kept using their resources. They never waved the white flag. They never quit. So, I think he put him on that list because, they were making an effort. He was considering them. I don't think it was always like I was never considering Alabama. I think in the last 2 weeks or so, the separation has kind of taken hold.
In terms of the school he plays at, what type of, I know a lot of Indiana fans are not going to be familiar with this high school and kind of the competition and who they play. Like what's obviously it's a lot different from what Montverde does, but kind of what's the lay of the land where he plays and what kind of competition they playing against?
It's big time competition. They actually play Montverde this year. They have to play them at Hoop Hall. So they play a major national schedule at Bishop Stepney. Now they do play New York schools too. So they play in a league in New York where when they play their conference games, for lack of a better term, they'll play other New York schools, other high level New York schools, private schools. But their non-conference schedule is made up of, Montverde's IMG's Oak Hills. They go to these big events, Hoop Hall West. They'll play in big showcase events. I think they're playing against the Boozer twins. I have to check that this year.
Wow.
They're going to City of Palms this year where, it's a big showcase in Florida. So they travel the country and they play major national schedule. They've got Boogie. They've got guys underneath him that are going to be D1 prospects as well in 2026 more than 2025. But, they have guys. It's a stacked team.
How surprised have you been just at Mike Woodson's ability to come in and, at first he was winning these shorter recruitments, the first cycle, getting Tamar Bates after he became available. Then he signed Jalen Hood-Schifino. spring, he's able to get Malik Renew. Then this past spring, he's able to get McKenzie and Baco. But this was really with McNeely, one of the longer recruitments that he was able to win for a 5-star. I guess a 2-part question. How surprised have you been at his ability to land these higher caliber prospects in Indiana? And then I guess what does it say maybe about the direction of the program that he's in a recruitment now against, Boogie Fland, where he's going to head with Kentucky, that, that hasn't really been the case in recent history for Indiana basketball.
It was interesting because when he took the job, and you remember this more than I do, the big knock was, oh man, he's a great coach, but is he going to be able to recruit at his age? Can he relate to the kids? And I'll admit it, I didn't come out and say it publicly, but, I had some questions of, is he going to want to do what it takes to recruit in this era where everything is changing around us? Like, it's not like you're coming in, you're like, okay, this is how it's always been. This specific era of recruiting, because of the transfer portal, because of name, image, and likeness, it seems like everything is evolving daily and nobody really knows how to walk through it. So I think that makes it kind of doubly impressive that he was able to adapt to this changing landscape, this new landscape at his age, and has really shined. And, I think he's done it the right way. He's taken baby steps, right? I think the big leap, when you mentioned Jalen Hood-Schifino, was taking a guy like that, who was a highly ranked prospect, a 4-star, was never considered to be a one-and-done lottery pick, and developed him into one. And so now that you've done that, you're not selling a dream anymore. I think he used to be selling a dream where it was like, come to Indiana, I have this NBA experience. I know what it takes to get you there. I can't prove that yet, but I know. Now he can point to Jalen and say, hey, this kid came in here as, outside of the top 20, and now look. So he has that to point to, which I think puts kids at ease. And, I think that's kind of, if you really want to draw a Big Ten comparison, you look at what Juwan Howard did with that first class, and nobody really clicked for him. It didn't pan out right away. And the recruiting fell off because of it. It's gone the other way with Indiana, where Hood-Schifino clicked, is in the NBA right away, and now he has that to point to, and he's kind of built off that momentum, I think. And I think that's a big reason why you see guys like Baco and McNeely now in the fold.
Not going to ask you, obviously, to make a prediction, but in terms of Boogie, what maybe do you think the biggest factors are going to be for him coming down to the wire here in the decision? Do you feel like I assume when a guy says they're going to announce Friday, do they already feel like they know what they're going to do? Just what are maybe in your eyes the biggest factors that lead to where he ultimately chooses?
I feel like he already knows. As far as the biggest factor goes, he's played this so close to the vest. I think that he wants a place that's going to prepare him quickly for the NBA, like everybody else. And I think he wants to win. He's always kind of been a kid that's chased winning and wants to win. His high school does a lot of winning. I wrote a story a week ago saying that I thought Kentucky held a slight edge, maybe 2 weeks ago. Kentucky held a slight edge, and I still think that. I'm not going to rule Indiana out because I think it's closer than a lot of people think. But if somebody gave me, I wouldn't I'm not putting in a crystal ball. But if somebody gave me $100 and say, hey, bet this on one of these teams, I would probably bet it on Kentucky.
Derik Queen is obviously the other name out there that Indiana fans are obviously interested in. As I said, he's got a visit coming up this weekend to Maryland. He's already visited Indiana, Kansas, Houston, LSU. So it seems like most of the discussion with him is centered around Maryland, Houston, and Indiana, maybe a little bit of Kansas. Is that kind of the consensus in your eyes right now with him?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to Kansas. I think Houston, maybe. I think they really like that visit. I talked to his coach who was down there after the visit, and he seemed to really like the Houston visit. I think it's Maryland and Indiana at the top. I'm not as with him. With Boogie, I feel like Kentucky probably holds an edge. With Queen, I don't even want to handicap it because, with Liam there now, with Maryland not necessarily standing on a stable footing as Indiana, in my opinion, I could see Indiana winning that one. This weekend in Maryland is going to tell the tale, though. We're going to see what happens. I know that a lot of it with Maryland is they've talked to him a lot about name, image, likeness. I don't know what kind of money they're, we can sit here and pretend like that doesn't play a role, but it plays a huge role in everybody's recruitment. I don't know what kind of money they're working with. I've heard that they're using a big chunk of their budget on him. And they hope they can get him. But I've heard nothing out of that camp that makes me think that it's a lock by any stretch of the imagination. And I know that even the Maryland camp is very, let's call it, aware of Indiana's presence in this one.
When you watch him play on film, obviously not a guy that's playing a ton above the rim. Has great footwork. Looks like he has great hands to me on from what I've seen him. his post game obviously very good, and he can step out. It looks like a little bit, 10 to 12 feet and make a shot as well. What, in terms of the evaluation process, what stands out with him and what makes him a guy that can make an impact from day one at the college level?
The ball never bounces off his hands. I mean, he might have the best hands in high school basketball. Like when the ball goes into the post, Derik Queen is catching the ball. And like you mentioned that kind of 12-foot game. He's expanded that in the last year, and I feel like he can maybe expand that even a little bit further. Now, he's never going to be a guy that creates a shot on the perimeter for himself, but as a catch and shoot option, he can do it. He's got a repeatable stroke. He impacts games defensively. He finishes through contact, obviously, and the trajectory is good. If you saw Derik Queen at this time, 14 months ago, he carried a ton of bad weight where it was like, ugh. He's dropped it. He's shaped up. He's gotten considerably more agile, considerably more athletic. And he impacts the game in a number of ways. He's one of those guys where even if he doesn't score 20, he might get 11 rebounds and a couple blocks, and he's a terror in passing lanes, and he does a lot of things outside of scoring the basketball that allows him to impact games even when, he's not scoring off the charts.
In terms of his recruitment, it seemed like for a long time that everybody felt like it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to go to Maryland. What do you think it is that has allowed Indiana to kind of make itself relevant in this recruitment? Has it been the persistence? Has it been the relationship with Liam McNeeley? I mean, a lot of times you'll hear guys talking about package deals and all that stuff, and it really never comes to fruition. I feel like most guys just kind of are going to make the best decision for them. You watched the other day when McNeely made his announcement, he had everybody surrounded him. Everyone's happy. Just, everyone makes their own path and everyone makes their own decision. But with this particular recruitment, it does seem like that Queen and McNeely are pretty close. I mean, he turned around immediately and said, I'm going to make a call to Mr. Queen, try to get him to join me in Bloomington. Do you think that has any impact at all on his feelings about Indiana?
Yeah, I mean, you have to know. I mean, you have to assume. I mean, those two are close. They played together for more than 2 years now. He's known that Liam is going to go to Indiana for, I don't know, as long as Liam's known, probably, I would assume, at least a month. I think that, more than anything, and I hate to go back to this, I think more than anything, it's been the persistence from Indiana. And I really think it's impossible to overstate how important what they did with Jalen Hood-Schifino is. Like, I mean, what they did there, it's one thing to get the number 5 player in the country and put him in the draft. It's another thing to do what they did there and be able to point to the development, because that's what every kid wants. The two most important things to them, you want to say winning, that's fine. Winning is probably third these days, is name, image, likeness, money, and can you get me to the NBA? And when you can illustrate that you didn't just take a guy that was already NBA bound and get him there, when you can demonstrate that you developed a guy there, I think it's a big poker chip. I think Mike Woodson has used it very, very well. And I think if he can do it again, it'll only compound.
So do you think that also resonates with just the people at Montverde seeing that in terms of how they view Indiana? I mean, you never want to say, there's a pipeline between a college and a school, because that's not exactly how it works. A lot of people like to use that term, but they did get Malik Renew. They got Jalen Hood-Schifino. They got McNeely. It feels like they've done something in terms of being able to get in with the guys at Montverde.
Yeah, and I don't think there's, like you said, I don't think there's ever like, there's a pipeline, we're going to send all our guys to Indiana. But what does happen is that these dudes are friends, and they're friends with the guys in the younger classes. And even if they don't think they want to go there at first, they definitely want to visit, right? And go see their friend and hang out on a college campus and, party with their friends and hang out, like whatever. And that helps you get them on campus. And once you get them on campus, as you know, things can start moving quickly. So I think that's the way that a pipeline exists. I don't think it exists in the traditional sense where it's like Montverde to Indiana, it's something you have to do, but it does help you get visits. I believe that. And if you get visits sometimes turn into commitments, as we've seen with Liam, I think. I mean, he visited Indiana early. That first visit was early.
Yeah, he did a junior year official, and then he did a senior year official. And I think that obviously he's mentioned Hood-Schifino, so there's obviously some type of relationship there. And you're right, guys do talk to each other. I want to go back to Hood-Schifino for just a second. You mentioned he was a highly acclaimed prospect coming out of high school. Depending on where you looked, I think he was somewhere between 20 and 30 in the country. That's not necessarily, as you mentioned, surefire one and done territory. He becomes a one and done. I guess, where did he make the biggest jump from when you saw him in high school to be able to be a guy that was just in college in 1 year? Where did he improve the most?
I think he improved the most just from a confidence standpoint and as a shot creator. He was always a pretty good distributor. I think he could get his teammates involved. He was always a pretty good shooter if you spot shoot, like whatever. But the way that he played off the dribble in Indiana, the way that he defended Indiana, and just the confidence that he showed as being an alpha there, I think. At Montverde, he wasn't always option number one. There were other guys on that team, even if I can't even remember who they are right now, because as soon as guys graduate from high school, I block them out of my memory forever. But he did. He really played like an alpha there at Indiana, where he didn't really do that so much all the time. There were some inconsistencies there. At Montverde, no different than what we just talked about with Boogie Fland, where he would make youthful mistakes and he would sometimes kind of go into a shell when things went bad. He didn't do that at all in the Big Ten. Whatever they did at Indiana kind of helped him that way. And also, they taught him how to create for himself. He was a guy that was creating shots off the dribble, and he wasn't doing that as much in high school.
NIL obviously you mentioned is kind of the number one factor now in recruiting. When you're talking to prospects around the country, doing interviews, how much it's it's almost like an unspoken thing sometimes, but also we all know it's a factor. How do you approach, when you're talking to kids, like bringing up NIL? Do you just kind of?
It is a nightmare. It's a nightmare because they all act like they're doing something illegal. Like, you talk to the people around them, like their coaches, and they'll openly talk to you about it. But if you ask a kid about it, they're like, "Oh, I've never heard of that." It's like they act like you've asked them to solve for X, but because they don't know what they can say, I don't think, and they don't know what to say. And, some parents are even still pretty skittish about it, where it's like, I got into there's no other way to say it, an argument with a high level prospect's mom once, because I wrote that, if the NIL money is there, that, a certain school would land this prospect. The mom called me and was like, "Hey, I don't want it looking like we're looking for money." And I'm like trying to explain to this. So I'm like, your son is a great basketball player. He deserves the money. Like, this isn't a bad thing. It's not like we have to hide from it now, but there's still this like weird stigma that like, it's hard to talk about because the kids don't want to talk about it. The parents don't want it to look like they have their hand open, even if the kids deserve the money for their services. Nobody's coming to the arenas to watch the coaches coach. And I think that'll fade. I think it's just so new right now that people just don't know what they can say. They're very paranoid about what to say. So unless you're talking to a coach or kind of like, somebody that's kind of familiar with the recruiting process, it's really hard to address it with the kids.
The interesting thing is this has been going on for a long time in the background with certain schools. And now it's finally a thing that's legal and it can happen. And the kids still, I guess, are a little bit behind in terms. And I understand too. It's also a private thing. It's not like all these guys are disclosing the monetary value of the deals that they're getting. But
it's so confusing.
Reality,
too.
right?
It's reality, and it's confusing. Like, if you ask somebody that's not like in our jobs, like if you ask somebody that considers themselves a casual college football, college basketball fan, nobody really knows what the rules are. It's like, can the coaches facilitate? Yeah, but no. Can they use an NIL to recruit? Yeah, but no. So I don't blame the kids for not wanting to say anything because they don't know what they can say without getting somebody in trouble. It's not necessarily very outlined on what the laws are here.
Not without naming names, have you talked to kids that will openly talk about it?
Yeah, sort of. They won't talk numbers, obviously, and they won't say, "Oh, I'm waiting to hear on how much they can pay me," but they'll say, yeah, it is a factor in my decision, and that's kind of as far as it goes. And that's rare. It's rare to get somebody to even admit that it's a factor. Rare.
Yeah, I mean, there's another one of the recruiting services has like an NIL ranking. I think On3 has their own like NIL valuation. So it's like these guys clearly know it's a thing and it's out there, and to me it's silly that it's still not like, just talk about it. I mean, I don't have to say I'm getting 500,000, but at the same time, just say, it's obviously a factor because especially with the highest level prospects, getting to the NBA is important, but also, you also want to go to the place where you feel like you're getting fair market value for the player you are, right? I mean, it just makes sense.
Yeah. And that's everybody's job. That's my job. That's your job. That's, everybody. It's not just them. It's, if you're going to provide a service, you should be paid for it, and you should be paid in accordance with how well you do it. And I think players will understand that eventually, but it's been just such a taboo thing for so long that I think it's so hard ingrained into everybody, around this sport where it's like, well, you just never talk about money because it used to be duffel bags,
Yeah. Last guy I wanted to ask you about, he's actually a 2025 recruit, but he's from Indiana. Jalen Harrelson, obviously, is a guy that Indiana's been recruiting for a long time. He makes moves from Fishers to Lalu this year. I don't want to talk about his recruitment because there's obviously a long way to go and probably a lot more schools going to get involved. And it's obviously a national recruitment with what he is, where he's ranked. But in terms of a prospect, what do you like most about him and how he projects to the college level?
He's another one, and I don't want to obviously he's a much different player, but he's also another one that you could see kind of the well-roundedness setting in where it's like, you look at him and it's like, does he do anything spectacularly right now? No. Is there a giant flaw? No. I mean, I don't see it right now. My sample size on him is still pretty small too, to admit. I've probably seen him live three times. So, I don't have a ton of opinion on him. But the 2 times I have, it's been like, okay, he's checked boxes. We'll put it that way. So he handles it well for his size. He can shoot it pretty well for his size. But it's still so early. This year at Lalu, I'm going to see him a lot. And, I'll have a more informed opinion on kind of what happens with him going forward from there.
Rob, thanks for the time. Where can listeners of the show find your work and how can they follow you on social media?
Yeah, everything that I write is on rivals.com. It's on the basketball site. So you got to click through the pesky football stuff, which our company, that's the bread and butter for the company. So I shouldn't make fun of the football stuff. Or you can follow me on Twitter at Cassidy_Rob. The person that has the Rob Cassidy handle hasn't tweeted since 2009, and they're looking for their estranged sister. And I hope they found her, but I would like to have that handle one day. But for now, I'm at Cassidy_Rob.
You could probably just DM Elon Musk and he'll get that right over to you, right?
Yeah, I really should. He's going to ask him to hook me up. I mean, seriously, there's like 3 tweets from that handle, and one of them is like, looking for my sister. And I hope hasn't tweeted since. So I hope he found his sister.
Rob, thanks for taking the time. I know you're busy. Really appreciate having you on. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of good insight here. So I really appreciate it.
Hey, anytime. Appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for listening to Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.